Welcome to the Inner Codes of the Beautiful. We've been looking at the many facets of the sun, Surya, and his many manifestations as Aditya. So this week we'll look at a very special Aditya again, who is called Aryama Aditya. Aryama Aditya is the Aditya that we see when sun enters the sign of Taurus or Vrishabha. Usually it happens somewhere between mid-May and goes all the way for a month till about mid-June. In the scriptures, Aryama Aditya is often described as a companion, a close friend, and more importantly, the association with a life partner. In fact, in Hindu marriages, it's usually the practice to invoke Aryama Aditya as the witness to the marriage being solemnized. There's also another association with Aryama, or the reference of Aryama Aditya being the protector of mares. So clearly that's something that we have to try and understand what that would mean. And the other association is, of course, that the Milky Way itself is referred to by his name. It is called the Aryamanapanta. So what's the idea behind Aryama Aditya? Aryama Aditya has a very central preoccupation. He is concerned with the continuation of the lineages. So Aryama Aditya, in order to ensure that the continuation of lineage happens, he also looks into a few factors that enable it. And the first factor is the purity of the lineage. So how does Aryama Aditya do? See, for instance, when we talk about lineages, many of us would be familiar with the concept of Gotra. Gotra itself comes from the root word go, which is cow. And the Vrishabha Rashi, or the Taurus, as a sign, is represented by the bull in its masculine form, and of course the cow in its feminine, which is called go. So go is the root word for Gotra, and the lineage hence comes from the Vrishabha Rashi. And the Vrishabha Rashi has all these preoccupations related to the purity of the lineage. So Aryama Aditya, he is very much concerned with ensuring that the lineage is not diluted, mixed or corrupted in any which form or way. And in order to ensure that, he wants to ensure that there is purity in the relationship of marriage. And hence, he is also bothered about the fidelity that's maintained in the marriage. This is, of course, something that we will also see as a central issue that comes up in the discussion between Arjuna and Lord Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita. If you were to take the very first canto, where Arjuna goes into this enormous pleading and he is desolate and he just wants to give up even before the start of the war. Among the many arguments he puts forth is fighting his own clansmen would destroy his own kula, his own clan. And he talks about the many things that would ensue once the clan is destroyed. He says, when the clan is destroyed, with it go also all the sacred traditions. And when all the sacred traditions are lost, dharma is lost, righteousness is lost. And when dharma is lost, adharma, which is the lack of righteousness, leads to a loss of the moral compass. And he says, among other things, when the moral compass is lost, he says the women of the clan also lose their moral compass and become varshaneya, depraved. And when the women of the clan become depraved, he of course talks about eventually the loss of purity in the lineage itself, and with it the loss of all the sacred traditions and the refinement of whatever the particular clan has accomplished over generations, which could be culturally prominent or significant, which can be professionally prominent and significant, and in the many other spheres as well. So hence, Arjuna talks about the importance of the purity being maintained in the lineages, and that is the preoccupation of Aryama Aditya. Now, besides the purity of the lineage being maintained, he also wants to ensure that the lineage is also protected and sustained. And in order to do that, Aryama Aditya is also the one who provides for all the wealth and resources. Hence, it's not a surprise that Taurus, which is the natural second house, becomes what we call as the house of wealth or Dhanabhava. So, he ensures there's a lot of surplus, abundance, because Vrishabha or Taurus as a sign also signifies agricultural produce, the wealth that you get from agricultural resources and so on, and also the wealth that you basically have. Wealth is something that is always there. It is not income. Income is viewed as something else from another house altogether. We look at it from the 11th house. But from the second house, when you say wealth, like for instance, there could be people who just have wealth from various for various reasons. For maybe they're just born wealthy and they just have wealth. They need not have a source of income, but they're wealthy. So we are talking about that kind of wealth that sustains and it's always there. That is something to do with Vrishabha or the blessings of Aryama Aditya. Of course, the third thing is, in order to ensure all this, like I was mentioning about the argument that Arjuna put forth with Lord Krishna, it is the purity of upholding the sacred traditions in its purity, which means there is no distortion of traditions, and those ancient traditions or traditions that have been passed down and refined over generations and have been accepted as something that is in a more or less refined state, is something that is not diluted and passed on, and hence there's a fidelity to the certain practices that have been passed on over generations. So this, he is also seen as the upholder of traditions. He is the typically what one would call as orthodox. Besides being the upholder of sacred traditions, Aryama Aditya is also the one who is responsible for our relationships with the world, with the way we engage with the external world. And one of the very important things that Aryama Aditya wants to ensure is that we go about engaging with the world, with the people, and in our relationships, and with various other relationships that we might have in this world. We go about it by avoiding without a sense of hatred. Now, why would this specific point be so important for Aryama Aditya? The point about hatred is, hatred triggers the Shadripus, or the 6 vices. And all humans, irrespective of whoever they are, have the 6 vices of the Shadripus in some measure, in various combinations and various intensities. And what are these 6 vices of the Shadripus? Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsarya. Kama is excessive desire or lust. Krodha is anger. Lobha is avarice and greed. Moha, it's being obsessive about something and also being deluded as a result of this kind of an obsession. Mada is arrogance stemming out of an inflated sense of ego or pride. Matsarya is envy or jealousy. So all the 6 vices are in some measure in every human, and the moment one chooses the path of hatred, the specific dynamic is one of these 6 vices or Shadripus gets triggered. And what happens when the Shadripus gets triggered? We again have a very important secret or a clue revealed by Maharishi Jaimini. Maharishi Jaimini, as you might know, is one of those Maharishis who was the disciple of Maharishi Vedavyasa, and he was the custodian, or he was given the Sama Veda. And of course, Maharishi Jaimini contributed a lot to the science of Jyotisha in his what we now refer to as the Upadesha Sutras. And one of the sutras, which is very, very cryptic, he says, Tanau Tana Dandahara. Tanau Tana Dandahara means the 6th, from the 6th causes Dandahara. The 6th house is the house of Shadripus, the vices. And the 6th house from the 6th is the 11th house. The 11th house is the house where we also eventually get punished. And Danda comes from the 11th house. And who is the one who punishes us? It is Rudra. Danda Hara. Hara, Rudra. So, Rudra punishes for the sins that have effectively been triggered by our vices. And when Rudra punishes us, who gets affected? The 7th house, or the Marakasthana from the 11th house, is the 5th house, which is the Putrasthana, or the children, one's own children. So one's own children eventually are going to be affected because of the sins committed by us. And if the children are affected, we are talking about the lineage, and hence Aryama Aditya is preoccupied with this specific question, and he wants us to avoid having the Shadripus, and he knows the root cause of Shadripus is not to foster hatred. By now we understand about Aryama Aditya's crucial relationship with the lineage. So not surprisingly, if we talk about Gotras, the progenitors of the lineages are the Saptarishis. And Saptarishis are, of course, we are talking about our mains, the ancestors. So the Pitras, the worship of the Pitras, is also something that is within the ambit of Aryama Aditya. And of course, earlier I was mentioning about the idea of Aryama Aditya being referred to as the protector of mares. Now there's a little story there. Surya was married to Sanjana. Sanjana was the daughter of Vishwakarma Prajapati. And Sanjana, when she was married to this resplendent and blazing bright husband in Surya, she could not take the heat of her husband. So in order to shelter and preserve herself from the heat of her husband, she took the form of a mare and hid herself. And of course, Surya eventually goes and he finds her and also takes the form of the mare, and he takes his wife as the mare, and that form is Aryama Aditya. So what that would also mean then is, when we talk about Aryama Aditya being the protector of mares, he is basically protecting his own spouse, and protecting the spouse is about protecting the family and the lineage again. So this is again, like I said, going back to the central point of Aryama Aditya's preoccupation with ensuring the fidelity and purity and sustenance of the family and the lineage. We should also keep in mind, when we talk about Surya being the source of blazing power, Aryama Aditya is the one, as Surya, who gave his powers, the powers of the rays of the sun. Out of the 16 rays, 15 rays were given to shape the various weapons of all the gods. And what are these kind of weapons? We are talking about the Trishula of Lord Shiva. We're talking about the Sudarshana Chakra of Mahavishnu. We're talking about the Sibika of Kubera, or the Danda of Yama, or the Shakti, which is the spear of Lord Subramanya or Skanda. So the power of the weapons again comes from the sun. So any weapon, any ammunition is powered by the power of the sun. It should be a good exercise to see how Aryama Aditya blesses individuals. Most well-known efforts came during the Crimean War. The Crimean War was fought with Britain and France on one side and Russia on the other side. And there were, of course, many casualties, as in any war. So Florence Nightingale, she gathered a few volunteers, women volunteers, and also a few nuns. And she organized this group of people to be able to take care and serve these soldiers who had sustained various injuries and so on, and nursing them back to health. And when she did that, we could say modern nursing was born at that time. And then, of course, she went on to eventually set up a formal school of nursing in London. And she set up the whole framework, all the, you could say, the policies and the framework that goes into the principles and the framework that goes into the field of nursing. And today her work is recognized, like when any nurse graduates, the oath that she takes is called the Florence Nightingale Oath. And the highest award that a nurse can get internationally is also the Florence Nightingale Award. So clearly she's someone who put a stamp in the field of nursing. And the other very interesting thing in a chart is, of course, the fact that Moon and Mercury conjoin, which anyway suggests such a person would be engaged in the field of healthcare. Usually you would find medical professionals having this combination, or writers. She did both. And this concept of frameworks, she also was among the pioneers in terms of visualizing data, which might come as a surprise to many people, but she did this work back then in the early part of the 20th century. And the blessings of Aryama Aditya is seen in these two things, where she took her interests were in the area of taking care of people and ensuring that life was preserved. We need to keep in mind that Taurus or Vrishabha is also the sign where Moon gets exalted. So when Moon gets exalted in Taurus, we are essentially talking about the physical well-being of a person. And so there was the work that she did was in that area. And the second thing, when we talk about family, the lineage and the family being so important for people with Aryama Aditya, she actually came from a very wealthy family. and in those days it is said that her father gave her an allowance of 500 pounds, which is approximately 65,000-70,000 US dollars in the current times. That was an allowance that he gave for her to sustain the work that she was doing in this field. So she got a lot of support from the family as well. So here you see Aryama Aditya having his blessings on someone here who is choosing to work in an area and also having the family support to do what she wants to pursue. Now let's look at another case study here, T Rama Rao. Those in India, particularly South India, would be very familiar with T Rama Rao. He was one of the legends of the Telugu movie industry. He was known for portrayals of many mythological characters, specifically Lord Rama and Lord Krishna. Many movies he played the same roles, and people began to perceive him as the form of Lord Rama and Lord Krishna. And the very important thing to keep in mind is that what aided in his portrayal of these mythological characters was also his voice. He had this very deep baritone. It carried that sense of gravitas and a sense of dignity, and also has a kind of a resonance which one would kind of attribute to someone who is celestial or divine. So his voice played a very, very important part in the roles that he played. Now, this is a very interesting connection with the sign of Taurus, because this Taurus is the second house, natural second house, which also rules the voice. So Agni Purana states that the bija ga stands for song, and the bija go stands for singing. So that's why gatram as a word comes from the root word of ga, right? And this voice is the blessing of Aryama Aditya again. And T Rama Rao had the blessings of Aryama Aditya there, and he was, of course, made a mark in his field because of the blessings of Aryama Aditya, the kind of voice that he had. And this blessings not just stopped with him becoming a legend in the Telugu movie industry. In fact, he was voted as the greatest actor in one of the polls, greatest actor of the century in one of the CNN polls. So he clearly had a great deal of success, in the movie industry. But it didn't stop there. He went on to become the chief minister of what was then undivided Andhra Pradesh for 3 terms. So why would that be? Again, he was seen as a messiah of the masses. And again, it was about the way he portrayed his roles and the kind of voice that he had. So that the success that he had, both as an actor as well as eventually having power as a chief minister, in no small measure owed to the kind of voice that he had. And of course, Aryama Aditya is also about lineages, and he had a large family. He had 8 sons and 4 daughters, and most of his children made a mark in their own individual fields in some way or the other. Let's look at another very interesting case study of Mani Ratnam. Mani Ratnam, as many would know, is the famous movie director from India, not just of the South, perhaps across India. Mani Ratnam comes from a family that has a very strong association with the movie industry. His father was a distributor, Gopal Ratnam. His uncle was Venus Krishnamurthy, a producer. His brother Venkateshan was another producer. So there's a strong association with the movie industry. But even more interestingly, is the kind of themes that Mani Ratnam dealt with in his movies. So, if you were to explore that, we can try and see if Aryama Aditya has any hand in it. If you were to take one of his classic movies, Nayagan is a story loosely based on one of the dons of the mafia dons of the Bombay underworld in the 70s and 80s, Vardaraja Mudaliar. So the movie is about basically how there is basically, so to say, the new kid in the block and going about taking on all of these mafia clans, the established ones. Then he goes about establishing his own clan. So in a sense that this is a very much a Aryama theme, where we're talking about clans having territories, and there's someone else who comes and then who battles to establish his own clan. So this was Nayagan. But let's look at another theme, which was a recurrent theme featured in 2-3 movies, which is again something that has to do with the purity of the lineage. So when we talk about purity of the lineage, by extension we also have to talk about issues of legitimacy or the lack of it. The movie Talapati is a movie where the protagonist, he is an orphan who's been abandoned when he was a child, and the whole movie is a long drawn exercise where the protagonist is seeking acceptance, and both from his biological family and his self created family. So in a sense, this is a movie where the theme is predominantly about acceptance, and through acceptance having some form of legitimacy. Then you also have the other movie, Agni Nakshatram, which was very directly an issue about legitimacy, where you have these two half brothers who are basically, there's a power struggle between these two half brothers, but the whole pivot of the power struggle, what it hinges on, is about legitimacy. One is from a very legitimate family, and the other one is not so, and hence is seeking acceptance and legitimacy. So here you have another situation where we are talking about legitimacy. The third movie, which is not directly about legitimacy but about lineages, so to say, and a form of acceptance or a search for it, which is Kannathil Muttamittal. This movie is about a child who is of Sri Lankan Tamil parents, and she is brought up by South Indian parents. But eventually, as she grows up, she wants to meet her biological mother back in Sri Lanka at the time when the civil war was going on. So here again you see this theme coming up, where the child is looking to go back and trace her own roots and going back to her lineage. It's a search for her own lineage. So this is a situation that you see again in his Mani Ratnam's movies. Then there's another thing which is about, again, purity of relationships, about specifically within the marriage. If you take the movie Mauna Ragam, in that you have a situation where the heroine, the protagonist of sorts, so to say, she is torn between the past where she had a relationship, an emotional relationship with someone. Now, for because of a turn of very unfortunate circumstances, she's married to someone else, but she's having difficulty accepting her husband, though this is the formal marriage. So there are questions about what is purity in a marriage. Is it about the emotion? Is it about the formal arrangement or the acceptance in the society, and so on? Again, we are talking about a situation where we talk about issues of purity in the relationship. And then, of course, the other theme of Aryama Aditya, which is about wealth, and of course about lineages, which is the movie Guru all about, again based on a real life character, Dhirubhai Ambani. This is about his rags to riches story, and besides, of course, his creation of wealth, he talks about establishing that empire and his lineage, which is that of wealth creators. So here you see a very, very striking theme where about 7 movies, what we've spoken about, all of those movies have essentially the theme of Aryama Aditya playing over again and again. It's about legitimacy, it's about establishing the clan, it's about the search for one's roots, it's about purity of relationships, it's about wealth creation. Then of course we also see that he also comes from a family where he's sort of continuing the family tradition of movie making or some form of association with movies. So that's Aryama Aditya at play in Mani Ratnam's chart. We spoke about Mani Ratnam's movie Guru on Dhirubhai Ambani. So let's take up the real case study of Anil Ambani, the son of Dhirubhai Ambani and the brother of the second richest Asian, Mukesh Ambani. Now, Anil Ambani was at one time pretty wealthy, but he of course hit upon bad times, and now there were claims of him in the courts in UK where he declared that his net wealth is down to zero and he's bankrupt. So here you have a stunning kind of a reversal. But Anil Ambani is again someone who has Sun in Taurus. So how does it work? Here we actually see that the blessings of Aryama Aditya are lost. He comes from a very wealthy family, a very wealthy father, very wealthy brother, but unfortunately in his chart you have a situation where Venus, which has a strong association with the second house or Taurus, because he's the lord of Taurus, is actually both aspected by Ketu and also conjoined with Mars, both of whom are Badakas, and also his Sun, which is the nakshatra lord, is also hemmed between these malefics. So here you have a situation where his wealth is completely disintegrated, which is a classic way in which Ketu goes about doing his business, disintegrate into fragments. And here you have a situation where the family theme is very strong. He comes from a very wealthy family. It has to do about wealth, but there's a reversal because the blessings of Aryama Aditya are lost. We'll wind up this episode on Aryama Aditya with a very luminous personality, Chandrasekara Saraswati, also known as Periyava or the Shankaracharya of Kanchi Kamakoti Peetham. He was the 68th Shankaracharya of the Kamakoti Peetham. Now, Chandrasekara Saraswati, if you were to look at his chart, he again has Sun in Taurus. So we have to see if Aryama Aditya has been having a hand at play here as far as his life was concerned. Now, in terms of the family, there seems to be no apparent connection with him taking up the saffron robes and becoming a sannyasi and eventually becoming the acharya of Kanchi Kamakoti Peetham. But there's a very interesting turn of events in his life where the previous Peethadipati or Shankaracharya of Kamakoti Peetham, who was the 67th Shankaracharya, happened to be the maternal cousin of Chandrasekara Saraswati. So the unfortunate turn of events was within a year of him taking over as the Shankaracharya, he passed away due to certain health issues, though he was pretty young. And through this very interesting turn of events, Chandrasekara Saraswati was eventually chosen as the Peethadipati, and he was consecrated when he was still just 13 years of age. And here you see where in some ways there's a new tradition created within the family, and the family has now got 2 Peethadipatis, of the Kanchi Kamakoti Peetham. The other thing I spoke about was Aryama Aditya being the upholder of sacred laws and tradition. And one of the biggest contributions of Chandrasekara Saraswati was his reinforcing and emphasizing the need to go back to the sources and preserve the purity of the traditions. So the first thing was he emphasized the need to go back with the pronunciation of all the Sanskrit words and verses from the original sources, and this was something that he emphasized on for training of all the Vedic Pandits, and also going back to the Agama Shastras to ensure that there was adherence in the ritual practices of various temples to the Agama Shastras in terms of the cosmology and the ritual practices and so on. So here you had a situation where Chandrasekara Saraswati was in some ways doing the role of Aryama Aditya, going back and preserving the purity of sacred traditions and upholding sacred laws, which is very much a telltale sign of Aryama Aditya. And most importantly, he had a very long run, which is again something Aryama Aditya wants to do. He wants to have sustenance over a long period of time. And Chandrasekara Saraswati was a Shankaracharya and the Peethadipati of Kanchi Kamakoti Peetham for 87 long years. So there you have a fair bit of understanding of Aryama Aditya and how he blesses when he is in Taurus, Sun in Taurus. Thanks for joining me this week. I look forward to seeing you again next week with another Aditya. Till then, take care.